Welcome to the Cult is King podcast. I'm your host, Rambling Bones, joined as ever by my co-host, the Duke.
Hey.
Duke, what is it that we do here?
Well, we watch cult movies. We look at those movies that have a following but have managed to evade the mainstream, either because they were too good for critics or too weird.
Or weren't marketed well, or for many possible
There's
reasons.
many reasons a movie can fall through the cracks.
And this is definitely one of them. It was my pick, and I picked The Phantom, a movie that I watched a lot as a kid. We both watched a lot as kids.
Yes.
And as time has gone on, I absolutely love the character. But when I first saw the movie, this was just sort of like a weird action movie to watch, and I didn't really appreciate it like I do now.
Yeah, I was surprised because it has been years since I've watched this, and I think I might like it more now.
Yeah, no, it's...
And I liked it as a kid. Now, I was terrified it wouldn't hold up. I think, though, that for this one, we might change up our formula just a little bit. Could you give us an idea of what the Phantom is before we start doing the synopsis?
That is exactly what I was thinking, Duke. We are on the same page here.
See that? We're such a good team.
So, for the uninitiated, the Phantom is a character created by Lee Falk, and he started out as a comic strip character. If you don't know much about sort of like comic strip storytelling, it used to be, here's the paper, here's a single strip of, the Phantom character, and you clip that out, and you put it in your collection of newspaper comic strip clippings, and then the next edition that had the next part, you'd clip that out, and as you keep clipping, you get the entire story to play out.
Right, and they were newspapers, but it wasn't like Garfield or something. These had constantly evolving stories, and there were lots of them. Everything from Flash Gordon to the Phantom to Buck Rogers. And to give you just an idea of the time frame, the Phantom's heyday began in the 30s, early 30s.
If I remember correctly, the Phantom came out 2 years before Superman came out, and I saw something suggesting that the Phantom is sort of a transitional character. He might be the first character to wear tights, or at least first superhero character to wear tights.
Well, and Lee Falk was also notable for creating Mandrake the Magician, and both Mandrake and the Phantom are considered by some to be the first superheroes. Now, there's some debate on that, but the Phantom definitely brought in, the idea of, the spandex,
Well, he's like somewhere between, characters like the Shadow and the Spider, but now we've added, the spandex and more modern superhero elements. But who the actual character of the Phantom is he is Kit Walker, and he is one in a line of Phantoms. The Phantom mantle gets passed down from father to son over many generations. So he's the 21st Phantom, and nobody knows that the mantle's being passed down, so they think he's just a ghost. So the Phantom has been killed countless times, yet he keeps coming back, so he's the ghost who walks. In reality, he's not an actual spooky ghost.
No, and he doesn't have any superpowers aside from just being in peak physical condition and being really good with his guns.
He's got...
It's refreshing to see a hero with, a 45.
Yeah, he wears a full purple tight bodysuit thing with... It's not quite a domino mask, but it's pretty much a domino mask. They didn't put it in the movie, but he typically has a pair of, I guess, what you call them, trunks?
Yeah, something like that.
But that are blue and black striped. He's got a big skull belt, 2 skull rings that he'll punch you with and leave a skull imprint on your face with. And then he's got 2 1911 pistols. He also has a wolf named Devil, and I believe his horse's name is Hero. I don't remember them name dropping the horse in the movie either.
No, I don't think I remember that either.
He's also a bit like Tarzan. He can swing through the jungle pretty adeptly.
No, there's a lot of different interesting elements at work here with a little Tarzan, a little the Shadow.
He's cool, okay?
He's
Just
very
take our
cool.
word. He's very
Well, and
cool.
he's shown up in all kinds of stuff throughout the years. But what was really interesting, though, is to see somebody make something in the 90s for him. It's actually kind of interesting how the character has endured. I mean, he's never been as big as Superman, but for somebody who started out in 30s comic strips, there have been pulp stories, novels, cartoons, a
They've
cartoon that takes place in the future, one where he teams up with
yeah.
Flash Gordon and Mandrake.
There were comic book runs. I believe Stan Lee even did a like a short 4-issue run with the Phantom. And prior to this movie, there was two cartoons. One of them was Defenders of the Earth or
I
Universe.
I believe it was Defenders of the Earth.
Defenders of the Earth. And that was in the 80s, and that was the one where he's with Mandrake and Flash Gordon. And then Phantom 2040 came out maybe like a year or two, 3 years.
It was
It
very
was in the
quick.
90s.
Yeah, it was very. I remember looking at that specifically and being like, oh, that wasn't that far off. I wonder if it was really successful and that's why they did this, or if somebody just liked the story.
And there were also serials, like old black and white serials for the Phantom. So that is a little bit of the background of the actual character. Now, as for the movie, the general plot is you've got these Tomb Raiders who are working for this evil sort of business tycoon guy named Xander Drax. And he sends them to the Bengala jungle to retrieve one of these special magic skulls called the Skulls of Taganda. Once all three of the skulls are gotten together, whoever has them will have some sort of power. I don't think it's ever specifically said what kind of power, but the kind you don't want in the hands of an eccentric evil business tycoon. And so, of course, the Phantom has to fight them, but the lead henchman Quill gets away with the skull. That sets Drax on the Phantom's radar. On top of that, you've got the Phantom's old colleague, friend, love interest from back in his college days before he became the Phantom. Her name is Diana Palmer, and her dad runs a newspaper that is investigating Drax. Of course, the mayor and the police chief are also in the pockets of Xander Drax, and so they don't really care about the newspaper guy. They want him to just drop the story. But instead, Diana goes and investigates, specifically a symbol that Xander Drax is looking into. The symbol is the symbol of the Sang Brotherhood. And the Sang Brotherhood are like evil pirates that are
The sworn enemies of the
the
Phantom.
sworn enemies of the Phantom, but also kind of Chinese, kind of not Chinese. The leader is Chinese, but everyone else seems very multicultural
It's a
here.
very progressive
It's
evil brotherhood.
it's very progressive. And Quill is a member. So she, of course, goes. Phantom gets mixed up with her, and it's really the rest of the movie is just them trying to get the skulls before Xander does. And the big finale is they end up at this uncharted island in this sort of weird, like Bermuda Triangle type situation. And there is a pirate ship, and there's gunfights, and there's sword fights. A guy gets blown away with a cannon.
And another guy gets disintegrated by skull
There's
chicanery.
there's laser battles. It's awesome.
It's good.
It's great. That is the crash course plot of this movie. I love it so much.
Yeah, so the first thing I did after I watched this is I was kind of curious because this movie has kind of slipped through their cracks, but it's not an unknown movie. Yeah, this is a movie that has a following. It's, I guess, what we'd call a proper cult classic. But critics kind of rip this apart, and if you go to places like Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic, it's pretty divided. They're usually like in the 5 and 6, the reviews are very mixed. People either really seem to have like very fond memories of this movie or seem to think it's just complete garbage.
Well, the weird thing about the critics, I actually saw a lot of solid, like, good critical reception from at the time. Like, Roger Ebert gave it a 3.5 out of 4 stars, which I mean, I'm not a Roger Ebert guy. I complain about him all the time, but that's pretty high. That's a pretty high accolade to have.
especially for him for a movie like this.
Now, there was another guy named Owen Gleiberman who I read his review, and it's like, I think he just went in a hater and he just wanted to hate. Like, his entire review is the character's outdated and stupid, and then compared it to The Shadow and The Rocketeer, which are acceptable things to compare it to, but he also hated those, which I haven't seen the Shadow movie, so I couldn't really comment.
But The Rocketeer is
The
another
Rocketeer is great. So
it's another certified cult classic, but one that most people who've seen it are on the side of this is a good movie.
it's a movie where the critical reception is mixed and also strange. So I guess I'd have to read more.
Well, and one of the people who originally helped write it also didn't seem very complimentary. It was written by a couple people, but two of the people credited is Jeffrey Boehm and Joe Dante. And Dante had said that they had kind of written this as more of kind of a comedic film,
Mm-hmm.
but then it got like completely reworked, but they kept a lot of stuff but played it straight, which, he thought kind of made it awkward. And I don't know how much of his original stuff is in there, because I think the lead writer's credited as being Boehm, if I'm not mistaken.
Joe Dante actually stayed on as an executive producer instead of directing.
Well, it's funny, too, because one of the original people who wanted to direct this was Sergio Leone. And if you don't know who that is the director of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and many just classic spaghetti westerns.
Man, I'm just so another thing that was also possibly attached was Bruce Campbell was in the running for the Phantom, but got beat out by Billy Zane.
They took it out in the parking lot. And
Yeah.
just...
But now I'm thinking of the alternative timeline where we have Sergio Leone directing Bruce Campbell as the Phantom. I can't even imagine what that would look like.
That would either be the greatest movie ever or a trash fire with no in between.
Yeah, no, there would be no in between.
That being said, I would I would put money down to see that.
I would also, since we touched on the writer, and so we don't have to touch on him later when we're going through the cast and crew. Jeffrey Boehm is interesting because he's at least the screenwriter. I'm sure that some of these might have, written by credits besides him, but he wrote the screenplay for The Last Crusade, Dead Zone, Lost Boys, Funny Farm, and The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. In fact, he was the entire creator for that show.
And that was a show that had Bruce Campbell in it, and it was kind of a sci-fi western. I believe he was also involved in Inner Space.
I think, yes, he was involved in Inner Space. So when we get to more of the cast and crew, you'll notice that everybody has done things. This movie was really set up for success, but for certain reasons it did not meet the success that it was set up for.
No, and to kind of give you the idea here, this was coming from a budget of $45 million, but it only did a $23.5 million box office. So it was not a financial success. However, and I don't know the figures on him, but from what I've heard, it sounds like though when it moved to VHS and then later DVD, that it sold a lot of copies. So they might have eventually recouped some of that.
Yeah, and of that box office, I believe only 17 million of it was from the US.
I just don't think a lot of people knew this movie was out.
I listened to one guy talk about it, and he was alive and cognizant at the time.
At that faraway age of 1996.
Yes. And he sort of said how he didn't think that many kids probably even knew who the Phantom was. I mean, despite having the cartoons, which I've heard that Phantom 2040 is pretty well reviewed and well liked, but
it was significant enough to have a video game, which we actually have a copy of somewhere.
And it is excellent. But apart from that, kids were probably not super well aware of who the Phantom was, and it looks like if you watch any of the trailers for the Phantom, they're not really good. I don't feel like they properly show you what you're in for. They feel generic.
Well, and here's the deal, guys. If you put tens of millions of dollars into a movie, take a little extra time to make sure you put out a good trailer.
Yeah. My theory, I always just default to the studio wanted to lose money, but I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to lose money and they were just really stupid about advertising it. Or maybe it really was a case of nobody knows about this man in purple tights. Why should we go see this?
Well, and I mean, it could have also been if you look at like the Phantom, especially like this kind of version of the Phantom where they have the bright purple and he's like the unambiguous like good guy in this cult adventure or pulp adventure. It kind of stands in contrast to a lot of movies and heroes at the time that would have been popular in the 90s, which was the decade of edge.
Yeah, he's not very countercultural. And I've also heard that like movies taking place in the 40s and 30s were not like a death sentence, but for some reason really uh
Yeah, sometimes the difference between being a great movie or a movie nobody remembers has less to do sometimes with the film and just the time and place. I think a good example of that would be like The Crow. Like, I like The Crow, but The Crow is huge with a certain subset of the population, but I think it was just the time, the music, like,
it came out at the perfect moment.
yeah, I don't know if The Crow had come out much later or much earlier, if it would have gotten near the attention it got.
Mhm.
I don't know. That's just my take on that. You might think differently. And I guess my larger point here is I think The Phantom may have just come out at the wrong time.
But I think the question comes is when would the right time for the Phantom be?
Right now, actually.
Mhm.
And here's my case for that. One, I think people like adventure films, but we don't see very many good ones come out. This is an adventure film, and another thing about this is just pure escapist
Oh yeah.
movies. And that's another thing where I think there's a big hunger for that right now, but not a lot of people delivering. And I think it would stand out right now in being like faced with all of these movies that have like oversaturated, or I should say like greatly like undersaturated
Muted colors
muted
perhaps.
colors is what I'm thinking of, or like political messaging, or are really heavy, where this is like very light, exciting, and I think this movie has aged well for modern audience attention spans because once it gets rolling, it just keeps moving from set piece to set piece. I don't know. I think this movie actually, if it, obviously it'd be a little different if it came out now,
Mhm.
but I think it actually has aged well.
You know, sort of what you said about if it came out now or if they made another one now. I'd almost agree with you in that if we look at westerns and how westerns exploded and then they died off, and when you're at like the death throes of the western genre, you start getting you get some really great westerns, but you also start getting westerns that are weird or different. They don't stand with the rest of the western genre. I think we're going to start seeing that with the superhero movies as the fad or at least the zeitgeist dies down. We're going to start seeing maybe more alternative heroes.
Well, and you know what, though? This is almost like, even though this is older, it's the perfect alternative to modern heroes. One thing I've been noticing a lot, obviously, I spend a lot of time going to like comic book stores and keeping track of that kind of thing. But one thing there seems a lot, maybe not super mainstream, but there is a lot of people right now who are rediscovering pulp fiction. Not the movie, but like that style of storytelling.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like obviously you wouldn't want to put an Avengers amount of money behind something, but I think there would be an audience for more like pulp style storytelling,
Mhm.
which is the tradition this comes out of.
Yeah. And you said it was an adventure film, and I think that is part of the reason I love it so much. I know we've sort of mentioned this before on previous episodes, but you don't really get a lot of great adventure movies. I think the first Mummy movie with Brendan Fraser
Great
is
adventure
is like
movie.
a peak adventure, as well as the Indiana Jones movies, and a lot of this is him in the jungle. I mean, I said that he fights pirates later. There's a short stint where he's in the city, but the city part is pretty small compared to all of the hijinks that happen out in the Bengala jungle.
Well, and even though, I mean, even in the city, there's a lot of exciting stuff. And the fact that he's like globetrotting from like the jungle to New York City, and then they're on a plane, and then they're, in this like uninhabited or uncharted island. That was another thing I liked about this too. Not only the action keep going, but they kept changing up the set pieces.
Oh yeah, and this I think could be something that rubs people the wrong way about it, but for me, I liked it because it felt very like it's a comic book movie, so it's written very much sort of like a comic book. It doesn't mince words about things that are happening. It's just, yeah, here's the Phantom. Here's the ghost who walks. Here's the backstory in very brief, succinct way.
Yes. Here's Xander Drax. He's a madman.
Yeah, it just.
Here's Diana Palmer. She's plucky and no nonsense,
It's not going to try to sophisticatedly explain to you the concept. It's just going to say, here it is, enjoy. We don't have time. Let's get the plot moving along.
And I think that's true to like pulp stories. Part of the reason they were so popular and kind of still are now is, don't get me wrong, some of them had like some really good characterizations or characters, but for the most part, I don't think of pulp stories as being necessarily as character focused as they are plot focused. And it's just, the whole idea is that you get the initial incident happening and then you keep rolling.
Yeah.
And this keeps rolling, and it doesn't really lull until it hits its final destination.
Before the Phantom even shows up, it really does feel a bit like Indiana Jones, except our Indiana Jones character
Are actually, scumbags.
are actually bad guys. They're going through the jungle. They end up in this cave full of treasure, and a skeleton like comes to life and strangles one of them.
Yeah, when he steals the skull, and there's like a big rope bridge before that they had to cross.
I don't know. I really dig it. I dig the whole aesthetic there.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. The strangest decision they made, and I don't necessarily think it was a bad one, is, and I know you've read more Phantom than I have, but was the introduction of the skulls of Taganda being more of like a supernatural artifact, because most of the Phantom stories, they were pretty grounded, weren't they? Or
they were a lot more grounded than that.
And it didn't seem super out of place.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was interesting, because I believe that this movie is almost kind of is cobbled together from like 3 or 4 Lee Folk stories.
If I remember correctly, the parts that are from the actual stories are Diana Palmer is an actual character. In fact, I believe she is married to the Phantom at some point. But the Singh Brotherhood, I believe in the actual strip, it's the Singh Brotherhood. But
yes, I actually heard they changed it because they Singh is like a common Chinese last name or something, and they didn't want to offend anybody in particular, so they changed it to Singh.
And then there is a group of all-female, like, I want to say seaplane pirates, but I think they're just plane pirates. By plane pirates, I mean they drive planes. But they're all female.
No, they're just normal.
They're just normal pirates. But, yeah, a group of women in planes who are pirates, and they are led by Salah, who's played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, who I was really surprised to see in this movie. Like, I guess little kid, I don't know who Catherine Zeta-Jones is, but rewatching, it's like, oh, that's like a famous actress.
You're right.
I mean, I guess a lot of people in here are like real famous actors, but regardless.
And though her role was kind of goofy, she does add that noir, like, femme fatale that needs to be in a story like this.
Yeah. But apart from her group and the Brotherhood and some smaller elements, pretty sure most of this is just an original story.
I think the subplot too about, so Quill is the name of the henchman we were talking about, especially like in the Indiana Jones-esque scenes. He killed the Phantom before Kit and stole his gun belt, which Kit later reclaims. I think that was also...
Yes. Yeah.
I think that element was also taken from the story.
One thing also about the Phantom is he talks to his Force Ghost dad.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it.
Or maybe he's just a normal ghost. Or maybe Kit Walker is just insane.
Maybe he just doesn't take his pills because he's hopped up on, jungle plants that, you know.
Yeah, in his skull. By the way, he has a skull cave.
Yes, he has a skull cave with like a library of ancient books.
There's a cool part where he saves Diana from pirates and he brings her back to the skull cave. And he's going to give her a gift to remember him by. And he just goes into, he has like a treasure room.
Yeah,
It's just like a ridiculous, silly amount of treasure, and just pulls out like, I mean, they're black pearls, so they're actually worth something, but it's nothing to him to
you're
just
like,
give
oh,
out a gift.
okay, I'm gonna just what do I have on hand? Oh, a pearl necklace. She'll like that.
Yeah. But no, the skull cave is cool. His whole outfit is, so I mean, we said that he got rid of the blue and black striped pants. He's got almost like a skull design on his chest area. It's not quite, but from certain angles it sort of looks like that. It's not bright purple,
but it is very much purple.
And I don't know, it doesn't look super silly. I feel like once you get used to it,
right,
once you accept the premise of the movie, you just go with it.
Right. And maybe they could have tweaked the design a little bit. I don't know, but yeah, no, I kind of just accepted that's what the Phantom looks like. He wears purple, and he likes skulls, and he has a gun belt, which is, heroes with gun belts need to make a comeback.
Yeah.
Though this Phantom definitely comes from the Roy Rogers shoot him in the hand style of gunplay.
Yeah, there are parts where he definitely shoots people. Like,
yeah,
you cannot interpret what happened in any other way, but there's so many times where he is just shooting things out of people's hands.
Guns, swords.
If you've ever seen the movie Rustler's Rhapsody,
which we should cover,
it's instantly just what it made me think of, just shooting people in the hands because you're the good guy.
Yeah, that's what you do. You can't have him just, shooting people all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
Though, to be clear, yes, he did definitely shoot a few people dead.
Yeah.
They had it coming, though.
No, I mean, one guy gets fed to moat sharks.
Yes.
And in the final big fight out, Xander Drax has tracked the last skull to the Bermuda Triangle-esque Uncharted Island. And, of course, that's where the Sang Brotherhood has their base camp. And they pretty much have something between a beached pirate ship, almost like a little Chinatown also built into the rock.
Yeah, it's like this really cool underground pirate ship fort
base thing.
Like Kabai Singh is the name of the he's like, just like the Phantom is descended from other Phantoms, he's like the last in this long line of like pirates.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got like all these just different pirates from all over the world there, and they've got like a cannon set up and a sword, and he has one of the skulls.
But of course around them there's a little moat and a little bridge thing, but in the moat are sharks.
Yes, and at one point during his fight with the Phantom, Kabai Singh falls into the water and he straight up gets eaten by sharks. You can see like the blood in the water and stuff. It's interesting because the last one, there's almost like this three-way battle between the Phantom, the pirates, but also Xander Drax and his guys, who could not successfully team up with the pirates.
Yeah.
Xander Drax is another good part of the movie for me.
Oh, yeah.
He's very, like, silly and over the top, but I kind of like that. But he's just, like, this just completely, like, evil jerk. And he's got, like, the mustache, and he's all, like, dressed up fancy, and he's, like, super enthusiastic about all of his evil plans. He straight up just kills one guy by killing him with a javelin.
So, he's a character who I feel like is really hard to do now. Whenever I see a sort of quirky villain, they're always, I don't know, they don't jive with me. It always feels like they're written wrong, but he is quirky in a way that works.
Right.
I'm not really sure what makes it.
I think it helps that, so he was played by Treat Williams. I think he just had a lot of charisma.
Yeah.
But also the way that, like, I don't know if I want to necessarily call it scenery chewing or something, but the way he goes in is he kind of plays Xander Drax as this, like, narcissistic a-hole, but he's super enthusiastic about each stage of his like evil plan. He goes from like scene to scene, just thinking of the next awful thing he's gonna do.
Oh, I mean, when he
Would you agree with that?
yeah, no, I agree. Like when he gets the second skull and he puts them together, and all this supernatural, magical stuff starts happening. You got all this loud noise and stuff. And he's just like, I love this. This is great. This is the future. And it would be, it is silly, but in the context of the movie, it's just great.
Right. No, he's one of my favorite parts. One thing that I remember as a child that always struck out to me is so the newspaper guy is trying to get information on Xander Drax. So he talked to, I guess, somebody from the library,
Like the archivist.
like the archivist, who revealed to him
what Xander had been looking,
which was like a lot of occult books and stuff. So he brings him in, the archivist, to Drax's office, and Drax is like asking him like, "Oh, have you been giving any information?" And the guy's like, "No, I've completely protected you." And he's like, "Oh, good. By the way, could you do me a favor and identify something in this microscope?" And he's like, "Sure." And he looks in there and he adjusts the microscope, and all he sees is the word liar, and then the knob twists and like daggers come out of like the eyepieces.
yeah,
Which we see Drax playing with that earlier, so we know it's coming. And it's not graphic because it didn't show anything, but just the idea of it as a kid, I was like, ugh.
that's the weird thing. Is this movie? I mean, we mentioned the shark eating part, but there are a few parts, that part included, that are kind of dark.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very pulpy. I mean, it sort of makes me think of like Dick Tracy villain type stuff. I mean, even when Drax kills, Drax is revealing his evil plan to his co-conspirators, and one of them, is like a mob boss, and he's like, "Man, I was raised an altar boy. I don't think that this is cool anymore. I'm out."
I don't want to mess with all this dark magic crap.
And so Drax has like a Zulu warrior spear and just chucks it at him and kills him.
And he just pins him to the wall, and you can see later, as everybody's leaving, he's like removing it and seeing the damage done to the wall. Like,
yeah, picking at it. And just little things like that where you go from the superhero shooting the bad guys in the hand, and then you've got the villain gouging out people's eyes.
Right.
So, as a little kid, these things are a little shocking.
Right. Because it's funny, because most of this, I'd say this is a movie that's more than fine to show your kids for the most part, but you might wait, they're a little older, or they might be traumatized by the microscope, or,
Or maybe kids are so desensitized today that this is nothing.
I'm assuming that there might be some parents who are decent parents who are listening, We're going to give the audience a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. You don't all just hand iPads to your kids, do you? And if you do, you at least have them watching Colt is King instead of Coco Melon, right?
Or
They'll grow up
Skibbity
smart.
Toilet. But
Modern society's screwed.
moving on, though, another really high point in this movie is a lot of the stunts and stunt work. That really stuck out to me. There's this one scene, and I swear it's not rear screen projection or anything, where they have a stunt plane and a horse. Like, there's a horse running under a plane, and you've got two people on the
pontoon.
The pontoon of the
I think
plane.
that's what it's called.
Yeah. And they go from the pontoon onto the horse. And looking at it, it's like, man, I'm pretty sure that you have an actual stunt guy moving from the pontoon to the horse there. That looks pretty real. I'm pretty sure that's real.
Right. If it is some sort of magic, then they did very good with it. But what I think it is just an impressive stunt.
Now, I'm sure it's not Billy Zane or Diana Palmer's actor, but there were a lot of scenes like that where, I mean, there's one part where he's jumping from car to car, just running across them, and the amount of explosions in this movie I was also impressed with, because they're all very good explosions. I have a feeling that they're all a little big for the items exploding, but who cares? They're cool explosions.
Well, and I'd say one thing that's good about the action in this movie is that it's varied.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of action movies will have constant action, but it feels like we're seeing a lot of the same type of stuff, if that makes any sense.
like John Wick is great, but it's if you've seen one scene from John Wick, you've sort of seen all of the action in John
Right,
Wick.
you kind of, but here it's very varied. I mean, one cool thing they have is they have a fight later on that rope bridge, and then he's trying to save there's a kid in the truck which is on the rope bridge, which is like falling over, and then he's in New York, and jumping from car to car, and then he's on a plane that's about to go down, and then
Mm-hmm.
they're on a pirate ship. So there's lots of just like different set pieces and things for him to interact with, which they do a good job of, having him use the terrain to do various things. But yeah, no, it doesn't seem like I'm always just watching gunfights. I mean, there's sword fights, there's, swinging like Tarzan. Like, he does it all.
Fighting people in a moving car while
Yes.
hanging from the moving car. No, it's varied, and I think it's all to its benefit.
Right.
It never gets boring. That is the theme of tonight's episode. It never gets boring.
No. Now, there are some things that do seem sometimes a little underdeveloped, like the romance between Kit and Diana.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that got cut. I think there was more of that originally. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the upside to that, though, like I said, is if you're putting, especially if you're a kid watching this, it's never slow. And you might like that.
I think this would be a complaint if it wasn't sort of kind of addressed. But there's a period where when he goes back to New York, he goes back as Kit. He's not just running around as the Phantom in New York at the start. And he meets up with Diana's father and Diana again. And the thing is like, he's very odd. Like, there's no hiding that this guy is the Phantom. Just like Clark Kent putting on glasses, it's like, yeah, no, we know. We know that
You
Clark
mean
Kent is
the
Superman.
oh, how many well-built guys with deep voices, and
Well,
jawlines.
there's even parts where he's doing like the Phantom stances, but has to like stop himself. Like he's got his fist on his hips, and then he like instantly just like has to stop.
Which was a nice little touch.
But at the end of the movie, Diana's like, "Yeah, I know who you were the whole time."
Well, you know what? Props to Diana for being such a good sport.
Mm-hmm. And so in that case, I'd say, oh, it's sort of addressed that he's very obviously the Phantom, but at the same time, it is a little silly.
Well, and I will say another thing I liked is I liked the Diana character too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she does play at some points kind of a damsel in distress role, but she also has like a mean right hook that
Mm-hmm.
we see several times, and I like how the actress did it. She leans back, she just leans into the punch, and it looks like she's just absolutely decked some people.
No, she looks like she put all of her might into the punches.
I think that was a good thing that they did too. That like modern movies, not all of them. There's been some good ones, but one thing they do is like you can have women fighting men in a movie, but it helps if they fight smart. If it's more believable, this isn't like the Woman King where you have like a 50-year-old woman beating young peak like
Yeah.
physique guys like just in a straight up punching match. No, the girls are smart and like use tactics and they aren't afraid to go low and
Yeah.
so that they come off as being like capable but not coming off as being like parodies.
Mm-hmm.
I do like this one point though where the Phantom he's trying to rescue Diana and the women pirates are there and the leader is the one who's played by Catherine Zeta-Jones and she like had Diana all tied up and stuff, but after they free her and stuff, Kit throws Diana the ropes and says, "Tie her up," and then Diana just decks Scylla instead,
Just
and
knocks her out.
that was so much better. I liked that scene.
No, well,
She had it coming. She stole her boots.
yeah, she stole the boots.
That's a jerk move.
That is. Well, another funny thing with the all female pirates is when he first meets the female pirates, he doesn't realize that they're pirate. He busts on them in the shower, and he's like, "Oh, I'm very sorry, ladies." And then one of them pulls out a gun and tries to kill him.
Right. He like gets into their locker room and they all start. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, this is, I think, my one sort of problem, or my biggest complaint with the movie is actually the ending a bit. At the end, Drax gets the three skulls together, and they pretty much turn into a super laser,
Yes.
which is cool. The laser is cool, but
Could have gone higher concept.
the thing is at the very end they introduce, oh wait, but there's a fourth skull, and it's actually the skull that the Phantom wears because he's got the Phantom ring or
Now, for the
rings.
record, they did mention that 5 minutes before this scene, maybe 10. Kabai Singh mentioned something about a fourth skull, but I wish they had introduced that concept much earlier.
No, it's something where they didn't set it up at all at the beginning. It felt very much, oh, we don't actually know how to end this. So what if the Phantom's ring was also had laser powers?
That would be a way you could defeat having.
They literally like picture any video game with, laser mechanics
You know what it
where
reminded me of?
what?
It wasn't exactly like this, but if you've seen Spaceballs, when Lone Star and Dark Helmet are having the Schwartz battle,
Oh yeah.
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, I think
Or like any of the Pipeworks Godzilla games where there's a beam attack against a beam attack.
I think the best contemporary example is in Harry Potter, where Voldemort and Harry, they're shoot a thing at each other, and of course, it's getting a little too close to me, but now it's getting a little too close
Yeah,
to you.
you know that if it was a video game, you'd have to hit X a lot.
You have to
You have to-
smash X, and so they have one of those, and again, it's like, wow, this is very out of nowhere and a little dumb, but even then, it was still cool. I mean,
It still looked cool. It was still fun, and even though it was kind of felt like it was pulled out at the last second, it doesn't seem completely.
I mean, with the rest of this movie,
It could fit.
well, and one part, it was just like a small touch, but I really liked it. Was Xander? He's leaning on the skulls, like pushing off of them, so he is not quite. He's doing like the Michael Jackson forward lean.
Yes, because the skulls are putting out. He's trying to like get leverage, and they're putting out so much force that he's like holding them up, but also leaning at the same time.
He's like, he would be falling down if he wasn't leaning on to the power of the skulls.
No, that was a good touch.
And
I remember watching that, and that it was like, oh, that's great.
it was a small detail that took the scene from being completely, what the heck is this, to, oh, this is cool again. And then, of course, Xander explodes, and there's a massive, very cool explosion, and Salah and Diana and the Phantom get away. Because Salah has a sort of, I guess, partway through the movie, she starts to realize that maybe we're the baddies.
Or at least maybe Xander Drax doesn't have my best interests in mind.
Maybe Xander Drax shouldn't have 3 skulls that form a super laser.
Well, that, and she's kind of sweet on the Phantom.
Yeah, of course.
Because nobody says no to the Phantom.
I do like, there's like a handful of sayings that come up through the movie. It's like, no one wins an argument with the Phantom. No one says no to the Phantom. Or they'll just say old jungle saying.
Old jungle saying, and it usually involves the Phantom.
Or it's just, very obviously like, we made this up on the fly. Old jungle saying.
Look, I'm not from the jungle. For all I know, they do say that.
Fun thing you can do is just tell your friends something completely off the wall and just say old jungle saying. They won't know. They won't know that you're full of crap.
What's your source, old jungle saying?
But I think that covers a lot.
It might be time to start talking cast and crew.
Yeah,
Unless you have anything you want to mention before that.
If I do, it'll probably come up in the cast and crew. Actually, I guess I'll start out by touching on the music, because that's another thing that stood out to this.
Yes, in fact, I hope you did, because I forgot to look up who composed it. But when I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh, the soundtrack to this goes kind of hard. It almost reminds me of like some of like the early superhero movies, like the 2000s Spider-Man.
The music is really good when it's actually there.
Yes.
I'll say this, at the beginning, I was a little annoyed because there wasn't really much music. I just kept hearing that stupid water horn. If you've ever watched Kitchen Nightmares or any of these like reality TV shows, there is this noise that they play when, whenever something gets serious, or like Gordon Ramsay, is like, you completely mess this thing up and you hear, but it's not quite that. If you just look up the water horn, you'll know what it is.
Right, and then you'll notice it in everything you watch.
And at the opening, when there's, they're trying to get across the rope bridge, or there's a precarious situation, you just keep hearing the stupid water horn, and I was a little mad. But then the music actually kicked in, and we actually got parts that have an actual score, and it's really good.
The theme is especially good.
I haven't looked, but if there is a physical release of the soundtrack, it is worth getting.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up in our cult vault.
But the music was by David Newman, and he has done a lot of things.
Not to be confused with Gary Newman.
No, yeah. But he did the music for Matilda, Tommy Boy, Coneheads, Critters.
We're going to have to do Critters, too.
Galaxy Quest, I believe.
Oh, that was another movie. Like, not all of those necessarily struck me, but Galaxy Quest also had a great theme.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because it's actually, I was going to the store and it's recently, I guess it was notable to somebody because they've recently re-released the soundtrack on vinyl every store I go to.
We already mentioned the writer, Jeffrey Boom. So the director, Simon Wincer?
It's spelled Wincer.
It's probably Wincer because he's not German, he's Australian, so.
Yes, which speaking of, that was part of the reason some of this was filmed on Australia. And then the parts that were either filmed in New York, obviously,
yeah,
or I believe Thailand was where a lot of this was.
I think Thailand was a lot of the Bengala jungle stuff. But he did The Lonesome Dove.
Yeah, specifically like the miniseries that had Robert Duvall in it, which is, if you like westerns, so good.
Oh yeah, it is fantastic. Cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah, and I'm not talking even in like a I really like The Giant Claw or some of these campy, but like, is it just a straight good storytelling, great western? Lonesome Dove is up there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really solid actors in it. But he also did Free Willy, Harley Davidson, and the Marlboro Man. He also, I believe, directed The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, like some episodes of that.
Which is very appropriate for this kind of movie.
Quigley Down Under. He's done a lot.
Some would say, though, that his best directing credit is for NASCAR, the IMAX experience.
I wouldn't even know. I feel like the name would be self-explanatory, but I have no clue what that would look like.
I don't know, but I just thought it was funny that was in the credits, so I thought I would include it. If we have any... if you're a big fan of NASCAR, the IMAX experience, just, drop a little something in the chat to let us know,
What is that?
What is that?
Oh, the suit was actually designed by the Jim Henson Creature Shop, which was strange to me.
Because he wasn't a Muppet?
Because he wasn't a Muppet?
Or anything conducted by a puppeteer, but, I guess there's probably transferable skills there,
Yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, I mean, I could see that they could make the suit. I mean, they obviously did, but I don't know. I guess those wouldn't be the first people I'd think of when I'd want a superhero suit.
Right.
But I guess maybe having a purple superhero suit, you go to the Jim Henson Company.
Well, and, not all of our movies can be done by Stan Winston. We've got to change it up.
Yeah, we gotta add some diversity here.
One thing I thought was fun when I was looking up the crew for this is how many cult movies they are in.
Yeah.
Even like the big ones. So the Phantom is played by Billy Zane, who I think he does a pretty good job of it. He looks the part.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a great physique for it.
They originally were going to give him like a body molded suit, but he just showed up to work ripped and continued to train while they were making the movie.
I think I heard that he spent like a year and a half getting into shape for it.
So, yeah, he doesn't need any molded plastic. He's like Adam West.
Yeah, that's right.
Pure. All natty.
Yeah, except that, and this is no offense to the West, he's my favorite Batman, but I don't think anybody ever doubted if he was natty.
Yeah,
but
that is very true.
Zane was coming off of, I want to say it was the late 80s, he was in a movie that's kind of a cult classic called Dead Calm.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people might know him as the bad guy in Titanic,
Yes. Oh, he's also in Critters.
Critters, and Back to the Future too.
Yeah, he's one of the bullies in Back to the Future, and he's, my memory serves me correctly, he's like the boyfriend in Critters who gets mauled to death.
I love Critters.
No, Critters is great, but he's also in the Tales from the Crypt movie Demon Knight. He's like the main bad guy. And if you want to see a performance that is in stark contrast to this, look up Demon Knight, because he is. It almost reminds me of like if you watch Michael Keaton in Beetlejuice and watch Michael Keaton in Batman.
It's especially funny because in this movie he like completely plays like the ultimate unambiguous good guy straight.
Yes, it's weird with Zane because I mean he was in Titanic and he's in some notable roles, and he's never stopped acting. But it feels like as the years go by, he's just sort of the star ratings on his films just sort of drop down to like 5 out of 10. Just sort of like I feel like he should be a really big name, but he isn't.
Right, yeah, I know. I wonder why he wasn't bigger, but he is. I mean, even as of last year, he was in stuff.
Yes,
So,
he's
I
still
mean,
acting, and he is in good roles in big important roles. He is in Twin Peaks, okay, for all my Twin Peak fans.
okay, so just to rant for a moment, I hope you guys could you guys just pray for the Duke here, because every time I talk to Bones now, I have to hear about Twin Peaks.
I started it recently, and it's become the new obsession.
Yeah, Bones always acts like he's the long-suffering one in this partnership, but no.
So yeah, he's in Twin Peaks. Moving on.
Xander Drax is who I had written up next, and he was played by Treat Williams, as I mentioned. And what was funny about Treat Williams is he got his start in Broadway,
Mm-hmm.
and even as he became an actor and started to take on lots of movie roles, if you look, he didn't stop doing plays. And he had some notable roles, like I believe he was like the Pirate King in the Pirates of Penzance, and lots of just like classic Broadway stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as movies he was in a movie called Dead Heat, which I think it involves cops versus zombies.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah, one called Deep Rising, and then he also did lots of TV. And obviously, all of these actors are in more than 3 or 4 movies. We just mentioned ones that
Yeah.
we either know or think you guys might like or are famous.
1941 is pretty notable.
Yes.
It's I haven't seen it, but it's one of those movies where all the people I know who've seen it just tell me it's awful. But it's Spielberg.
But then they show me clips from it that makes me think, oh, that looks good. It's also one of those movies, though, that also has like an absolutely like huge cast of people you would know. So,
Mm-hmm. And then I guess one last thing. He's also in Once Upon a Time in America, which is a pretty notable. Like that's pretty high class film.
so
Very broad.
kudos to him.
The next person I had was Diana Palmer's actress, Christy Swanson, who is in the film Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which this may be blasphemous, but I love that movie 1,000 times more than I love that TV show.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
definitely
don't even like the TV show. I just love the movie.
Yeah, that's definitely gonna earn you some ire.
She's also in Highway to Hell, which is a very nutso film, and she's in Flowers in the Attic. It's got a good soundtrack, but it's not a film I'd recommend.
No, but if you have a stupid sense of humor, you'll love Dude, Where's My Car?
Yes,
Which she's also
she's
in.
also in Dude, Where's My Car?
And then also a movie called Deadly Friend.
That sounds promising.
I think you'll have to forgive me because I didn't write down much about some of the movies individually, but I think I remember looking at it and being like, "Oh, that looks goofy. I want to watch that."
Yeah, she's another case of she like had promising start, has continued to act throughout her entire career, but has never really reached the stardom. And I'll say, like, I think Billy Zane I'm more perplexed by Billy Zane not being as big a deal than I am by her not being a very big deal.
But she definitely felt like a leading lady in this
No,
movie.
she's great in this movie. She's great in Buffy, and she's not a bad actress at all. So, I don't know. It
And
didn't work
it's
out.
funny, her character in this movie is definitely the opposite of her playing Buffy.
No, you've got some range there.
So Salah was played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. And if you enjoyed this movie, you should go check her out in Mask of Zorro, which is another good movie that is definitely like in this genre of picture.
Yeah, it's. See, Zorro was either the 90s or early 2000s, but I'm pretty sure it was 90s when it came out. I don't. I might. Be,
There was a
it,
couple of them too.
it sort of came out in this era, and there is sort of this slight return to pulp or classic heroes around this time. I mean, we mentioned the Shadow, and although the Rocketeer is all original, he is, very similar to a lot of these older characters. And
And they
then
all came out like within a few years of each other.
and then you get the Zorro movies, which are excellent.
Yes, and they were of the movies we've mentioned, they were definitely the most successful. And Antonio Banderas is really fun in those.
No, he's fantastic, and she's great in it too.
And she has a much bigger part in that one. She also appears in Ocean's 12, The Terminal, which is what I actually like that.
No, that's a good movie.
Yeah, that had Tom Hanks in it, and Red 2, where I'm trying to remember who she played in Red 2.
I remember
like a Russian
Yeah,
sniper or something, or
I remember her, but I don't really remember. Red 2 is sort of, it's a movie I saw, but not a movie I've really committed to my memory banks here. She's also in a remake of The Haunting, which wasn't very good.
No.
She wasn't necessarily bad in it.
There've been a lot of versions of it, but I think the only one that's really worth a whole lot was the 1963 one.
Oh yeah.
Which is very good if you like horror movies. That's not like, and it's not like it's not cheesy at all. It's just good. You should watch that.
Of all the actors, I think she's probably, maybe not at the time, but looking back now, she's probably the biggest name attached to this film.
Yeah, she definitely, if you take their whole careers into consideration, she's probably the biggest star.
Which is also interesting because she does not have nearly as many credits as most everybody who was in this movie. Yet she is just more famous. I feel
it
like
helps that she's a total fox.
and married to was it Michael Douglas?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's married to Michael Douglas. So
not to take away from her, I'm just saying. But no, she definitely. I mean, that's even part of this movie. She's the femme fatale.
Yeah, and she plays the role well. The character I'm most excited to talk about is Quill, the main henchman, member of the Sang Brotherhood, who's played by James Remar, who is a cult actor. He is about as cult as a lot of the guys in this movie are.
Right. The thing that threw me for a complete loop was, and sorry if I'm stealing this one.
No, go for it.
One of my favorite movies that's definitely a cult film is The Warriors, and he plays Ajax in The Warriors. And the funny thing is I've seen that movie before several times, and I had no clue that was him.
No, he is so, like, his face is the same, but I maybe it's just the way he talks in the movie.
Or maybe just seeing him in just a different time and setting is just very...
It's strange to look back and be like, oh, snap, he really was Ajax in that movie.
And then he was in the Tales from the Dark Side movie.
Yeah, and he's actually in probably the best segment of that.
He's the main character of the best segment.
Yeah,
so.
And I won't even talk about that segment as to not spoil it. You should... go watch the Tales from the Dark Side movie after you watch The Phantom.
Go watch Tales from the Dark Side.
Just go watch Tales from the Dark Side. He's also, this isn't really a cult movie, but it's a movie that means a lot to me. He's in Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito.
I like that.
I don't have a lot on James Remar's background, but he's like almost sort of like a character actor. One of those faces who just keeps showing up, but shows up in good things and in bad things, but also makes them good. and even then, they aren't really bad, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think another advantage to the Phantom I'd like to add that was good is we have a colorful cast of villains. James Remar's like, kind of poacher tough guy look, and then we have a Asian pirate captain, and we have a Russian plane pilot, and
She's not Russian, but
or not Russian. We have a seaplane pirate queen here and
type.
type, and then we have like the industrialist madman.
Mm-hmm. He is in this movie almost. He's not quite Indiana Jones, but he really does remind me of sort of that character type. And instead of putting it in a museum, he's going to put it in the hands
Of Xander Drax.
Of Xander Drax.
Well, and he does a good job too, because even though Xander Drax is the main villain, he's probably the one that has the most personal beef with the Phantom.
Yeah, but yeah, it is sort of good to have that dynamic of, I mean, because Xander Drax, he's, that actor is chewing so much scenery and having an almost more grounded bad guy.
Yeah, he's more of like the heavy.
Yeah, he's sort of more relatable.
He's the guy who actually like throws down with the Phantom,
Mm-hmm.
And then rounding out our cast here is the great Kabai Singh, who is played by Cary-Hiroyuki Tagawa. You guys have encountered him before, and you may not have realized it. In both the old movies, but also the video games, a lot of times he voices Shang Tsung from the Mortal Kombat series.
He does. Yes,
he does.
Yes, he does. Now that you say that,
I think even in the latest one. But he was also in the 2000, I think it was 2001, Planet of the Apes, a movie called Showdown in Little Tokyo, Memoirs of a Geisha, which is, a little higher brow than what we usually do here. And then he also, it wasn't a huge role, but he was in License to Kill, the James Bond movie.
I believe he was also an uncredited, like, Wing Kong extra in Big Trouble in Little China.
I think I want to say that this actor was involved in, like, martial arts. And I feel like for Big Trouble in Little China, for, like, some of the big scenes, they just had to empty Hollywood of, okay, every Asian actor who can look tough or do a little kung fu, we need, like, stat.
It's funny, like, if you've seen one movie with Asian kung fu bad guys, there's a good chance that you've seen them before in Big Trouble in Little China.
Right, which is...
There's a lot of, like, extras in there who are very notable looking extras, and you keep seeing them later.
And just to, just so you're aware, it's also a very excellent movie.
The last actor who I wanted to bring up, because there's just, you might have some more actors written down.
No, that was the last one I got. Definitely wasn't the last one I could mention, but I'm like, this is the last one, like, I felt like we've got to talk about this guy.
Yeah, there were so many people who are worth talking about, but we can only sit here and tell you about actors for so long before you rip your head out. So
rip your head out.
Yeah, that's it's old jungle saying. Okay?
Old jungle saying. Okay, Bones.
But the last person I wanted to talk about was the Phantom's dad.
Oh yes, I kind of glanced over him, but yeah, no, that was important.
That was Patrick McGoogan. He is Longshanks in Braveheart, like the evil king.
Yeah.
He's in Escape from Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood. He's in Scanners.
Let's talk about cult movies, Scanners.
Yeah, and he's also Billy Bones in Treasure Planet. He is, I don't know, after being like Longshanks in Braveheart, it feels like
that he could ever be likable in a movie, let alone many.
Well, let alone many, but also it's like, man, that's a pretty big role.
You know what, though? You want to talk about a beloved movie that just... like, to a certain group of people that just fell through the cracks. Treasure Planet didn't deserve that.
Well, let's just say that Disney wanted Treasure Planet to fail.
I know. They're evil.
They are evil. Treasure Planet is beloved by everybody who's seen it, except for maybe critics.
Right. No, justice for Treasure Planet.
Yeah. Yes. But he's also in this movie. We didn't talk about him a lot, but he is... At the opening of the movie, they give the most, a very brief explanation of the Phantom's origins. In fact, it opens up with some text that says, "For those coming in late," which is part of the way, like, Lee Falk would open up his Phantom stories. but it's narrated by him. And then in the movie, he's sort of like a serious mentor character, but there's also some comedy to him,
Yes.
especially in his desire for his son to hurry up and get hitched.
Yes. That's very important to him.
Mm-hmm. You know,
I like how, like, I was telling Kit about how Quill was the one who did him in, but he didn't seem particularly upset about it.
no, hey, he's probably had some time
To cope.
to cope.
Well, since phantoms don't tend to, live forever.
Yes. And I said that there's a little bit of comedy to him. I think that's one thing worth mentioning we didn't mention prior was although this movie is not comedic, or it's not a comedy like it was maybe originally intended to be, there are still comedic elements to it.
It's a very light movie. There's a lot of levity.
It's naturally comedic.
Well, and I think a lot of people are divided on this movie. We're both firmly in the camp of we love this movie. And I think part of the reason it works for us is Simon Windsor, before having this as what his project, was a big fan of the Phantom. He didn't come in not knowing who the Phantom was. He didn't come in trying to like subvert things. Like, he was a legitimate fan of the Phantom, and so was Billy Zane.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them were familiar with the Phantom, and both of them like loved the comic strips and stuff. So I think that kind of helped elevate all of this.
Well, there's actually, so Lee Falk was about 80 when this movie was made, and so there's pictures of him with Billy Zane. They actually, showed him the Skull Cave set, and Falk was very impressed with the direction that they were taking the movie and gave it his seal of approval. I'm both surprised and not surprised by the fact that the director and Zane were fans, because it's weird for us now to like look back at the Phantom and nobody know who he was, and kids not knowing who he was at the time either. But the Phantom really was a big deal back in the comic strip days.
Well, it's amazing. Sometimes the things that we remember from a certain decade aren't necessarily the things that were a big deal in that time. A good example would be It's a Wonderful Life. Good movie, Christmas staple for everybody. Did not make much of a splash when it was first released. But then you have, like, everybody remembers Batman, and he debuted in the 30s too. Mm-hmm. But if you were actually like in the 30s or the 40s, much more notable than Batman was The Shadow, who I think still holds records for just the sheer amount of stuff he sold and the sheer amount of adaptions, right? But not near as well known as Batman now, you know what I mean? It's funny what things stick and what things don't, because it's hard for a lot of people to imagine when they haven't heard these things, just the sheer heights they achieved in their time.
And I think part of it also just comes down to companies. So, Marvel has existed for a long time and has continued to exist. So,
and DC much longer.
There's never been a point in, the history of Spider-Man where I guess there might be a point where they stopped making Spider-Man for a short period, but Spider-Man has pretty much been consistently running since Spider-Man's debut.
Right, so since the 60s, Spider-Man media, there's never been any black period with no Spider-Man.
Same thing with Superman and Batman and a lot of these original properties to the company. Now, Marvel and DC both, did a Phantom run, but he's not a Marvel or DC character, and so he's never been a permanent fixture. So once we start moving away from comic strip superheroes, and once the media stopped coming out for the Phantom, I'd say that probably helped lead to his death in the public mind.
Right, and he's still interesting because he's definitely like a peripheral figure in pop culture. Because if you know about him, you're going to see references to him, you're going to see things inspired by him, and you might even see him just show up in the weirdest places. Like, there's always something with the Phantom that's still coming out. But yeah, no, he didn't have that kind of machinery behind him.
Yeah, and with Lee Falk being no longer with us, he might be in the public domain now.
If he's not, he's probably on his way.
He came out in the 30s, so he's most likely in the public domain now. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little more at some point in the future. There have been talks of reboots, and Billy Zane has even spoke positively of even coming back at some point to do it again.
No, it'd be funny. He could now do like the dad role almost, or
Yeah,
be like one of the previous Phantoms.
he could pass it on to his son or whatever type story. There was a like Sci-Fi Channel made a series, and it looks bad. They completely the suit looks like a guy in a bicycle helmet, or not a bicycle helmet, like a motorcycle helmet.
Yeah, I
It's
saw
really
that.
bad
The
looking.
only thing that made me think Phantom at all was that they kept the purple color scheme, and that was it.
And even then, I have a feeling that apart from like the promotional poster, if you actually watch the show, I bet it's not that purple.
Right.
It looks like a cheap thrown together show for the Sci-Fi Channel that didn't last very long. But
Now, if you want to see future Phantom, you should watch the cartoon, which all of it is free on YouTube.
oh,
I could be wrong, but from what I remember, the people who actually own it are the ones who put it up there. All of it's free on YouTube. I haven't seen all of it yet, but a lot of people liked it, so I think I'll give it a shot. So,
mm-hmm.
but it's an option for anybody who's listening right now if you're curious about it.
Oh, I guess we've talked about Lee Falk, but we haven't talked about Lee Falk. We said he created Mandrake the Magician as well, who was also a comic strip character, also in the Defenders of the Earth cartoon show. But I think what people forget he did was he was a big time director of plays. Like he did a lot of plays. I believe he directed like Brando and Duvall and a lot of these actors who started out doing theater and then moved to cinema. And he even wrote a few plays himself. One of them is actually based off of his Mandrake character, which I'd be really curious to see what.
I wonder if anybody ever puts that on, or, if there's a recording of that being
Well,
done.
not to get super into the weeds here talking about theater, but it sounds like there's a lot of plays that get made but aren't always easily found. I really like the idea of like horror on stage, but it can be sort of like if you're just looking up horror plays, it can be sort of hard to find ones that aren't just like, here's Dracula and here's Frankenstein. Here's maybe like two others that are famous, but if you're, I know that there's a ton of plays out there, but it's hard to find. So I have a feeling that his plays are probably somewhere lost in the weeds as well. But I just the idea of having like a superhero play.
The only one I can think of is like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark.
But a Mandrake the Magician play sounds very interesting to me. I'm intrigued. But he won a bunch of awards for his comic strips, I believe, and then also his theater stuff he did. So he was very successful.
Lived a full life. Lots of different adventures.
Got to see his comic strip turned into a movie.
Well, and he would have seen the serials, but I mean, serials were big in the time, but they weren't like as prestigious as having like an actual feature-length movie,
Yeah, serials are sort of there's a charm to them, but they don't hold up as well as just a full-blown movie. It doesn't help that every serial episode has to end with a cliffhanger.
Right. There are some that are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I might eventually, just for comparison check out some of the serials for this. I imagine that they're probably free in the classic section of about like, most.
Well, actually,
I bet Tubi's got it.
The last thing I have to say on the Phantom is, so there was an original serial, and then they made a second serial. However, they lost the rights midway through making it, so they changed the costumes and called him Captain Africa. I'm pretty sure, I'm about 100% sure his name was Captain Africa.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's a spiritual serial.
Well, there you go.
Do with that what you will.
Well, I think that wraps up. I think we had plenty to say on this one. We were both pretty enthusiastic to make this episode. So yeah, I would recommend watching this.
Yeah, just to tell you how how much I love this. I have the big Phantom belt buckle.
He's very proud of it.
I'm very proud of it. I like the Phantom a lot. So it's been a joy to share this with you.
Right. And if you don't mind a little cheese and love adventure, perfect movie for you.
Yeah. So go watch it.
Which puts the ball in my court.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Which is bad because you know what? I don't think it registered to me that I was going to be in charge today.
I would be more than happy to.
You know what? I've got one.
Oh, okay.
How about we do Battle Beyond the Stars?
You know, we'll have a lot to talk about.
That'll be a fun one. And we're always mentioning Roger Corman. Let's do some of his stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about not an abomination that Roger Corman brought into the world.
No, this is going to be just a preview. This is going to be an example of a movie that is way, way better than it had any right to turn out.
It's too good than it deserved to be. But you'll have to tune in next week when we discuss it. Where can you find us, Duke?
Well, obviously, you can find us on YouTube is where most of our views come from, but we are on Castbox, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Feel free to like, comment, especially subscribe. We would appreciate it.
Yeah, and drop a hashtag Justice for Treasure Planet.
You don't have to do that if you don't want to.
Hey, don't undermine my authority here.
But no, we appreciate all of the engagement, and thank you for listening.
And keep it cold.